Every couple of years, I put together a new perfect freestyle build. That's what you're looking at here, where I build a freestyle quadcopter using the perfect parts for me, at least, just without no compromises, no consideration for cost, just the stuff I like the best. And now finally, Betaflight 4.3 is actually really truly about to release, because it is now in the release candidate stage. And that means it really is gonna come soon. And that means it's time to do a PID tuning on Betaflight 4.3 with this perfect freestyle build. So at this point, you should have a quadcopter that is set up and flying, hover tested on Betaflight 4.3, and we are ready to proceed with the actual PID tuning steps to make it fly its best. And the first thing I want you to do is go into the presets tab, and you're gonna make this a standard part of your setup of every new build. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go here into the categories, and we're gonna choose RC Link, the RC Link category. You see, since Betaflight 4.3 has been in development, one of the things that's changed in the RC hobby has been that a lot of people have started using these high-speed control links. Control links like Ghost, Express LRS, Tracer, which can go up to as fast as 500 hertz. And it turns out that when you've got a control link sending input data that fast, some things about the PID controller need to change. But the good news is you don't need to know anything about that. You just need to select the correct preset for the control link that you're using. And by the way, if you did fly on the defaults, everything would be fine, but the quad is going to fly better if you select the correct preset for your control link. So I'm using Immersion RC Ghost. And you'll see here that there are three choices: Ghost for freestyle, Ghost for long range, and Ghost for racing. So I'm doing freestyle, so I'm going to select Ghost Freestyle, and then I'm going to review this list of options, and I'm going to choose which one of these matches the Ghost mode that I'm using. So we can see here, let's see, I'm using race. Great. Ghost race. Perfect. And then I will hit pick, and it will add that to the list of things that are going to be applied when I apply these presets. Now, if I type ELRS here, we can see the Express LRS presets are broken out a little bit differently. First of all, there is no freestyle, racing, or long range preset, and instead of having a single preset where you select 150, 250, 500, or 50, there are whole different presets for each of them. So the way these are presented is not going to be identical for every one, but you're going to go in and you're going to pick the one that is closest to the protocol or mode that you're using. Next, we're going to deselect RC Link, and we're going to select RC Smoothing. So another thing that Betaflight has changed in 4.3 is how the RC command, the stick input, is smoothed. Stick inputs always have a little bit of sort of jitteriness, and there's a trade-off between smoothing it a lot and adding latency, or leaving it unsmoothed and having jitter, but having less latency. And the simplest thing we can do here is we can just choose Freestyle, Cinematic, or Race RC Smoothing. And I'm gonna go ahead and pick Freestyle RC Smoothing. And we again wanna select the link speed here. Once again, if you, so I'm running Ghost at 160-ish hertz. That's not exactly an option here, so I can either pick 100 to 150, which will be a little bit smoother, but a little more latency, or I can pick 250, which will be a little bit less latency, but a little bit more jitter. And I think I'm just gonna pick smoothness this time, and I'm gonna hit pick. And then I'm gonna save and reboot, and all those changes will be applied. Now, there's a couple more changes that I make on pretty much every quad that I build, certainly every 5-inch-ish quad. We're going to go to the Motors tab, and we're going to make sure that bidirectional dshot is enabled. And that's going to allow us to use a feature of Betaflight called RPM filtering. RPM filtering specifically targets the RPM frequency that the motors are making, and it's one of the most effective ways to get your quad flying better. But you need an ESC that supports bidirectional dshot. All BLE32 ESCs, starting with firmware 32.7, support it. So basically all ESCs that you're likely to be buying today. and BL Heli S ESCs can support it if you flash the Blue Jay firmware to them. I've got a video about how to flash Blue Jay to your BL Heli S ESCs. I'll put a link down in the video description. I highly recommend it. If you enable bidirectional dshot, make sure that you set the correct number of motor poles. And if you, for typical 5-inch motors, it's almost always going to be 14 poles. If you're not sure about that, just pick up your quad and literally look at the underside of the bell and count how many magnets are on the underside of the bell. That's the number that goes there. So bidirectional dshot is enabled. Then we're going to go to the PID tuning tab. And there used to be in 4.2, in the filter settings, there used to be a change you needed to make to the dynamic notch filter when you enabled bidirectional dshot and RPM filtering. You do not need to do that anymore. Betaflight does it for you automatically, so just leave that where it is. And the other change that you're going to see I've made is I have disabled gyro low pass 1. The goal with filtering is to have the least amount of filtering possible while still having your quad fly good. If you have insufficient filtering, you get hot motors, you could even smoke your motors, you get rough sounding motors, the quad will not fly smoothly, or it may, in a bad case, even like fly away to the moon uncontrollably. So we want to reduce the amount of filtering and the quad will fly better and better because there will be less latency in the PID loop. And it is essentially always safe to disable gyro low pass 1 if you have RPM filtering active. So I'll just go ahead and do that. Don't, however, disable gyro low pass 2. Do not do that. Now, if you haven't already turned off the ADC filter on your radio, you should also do this before you fly. I'm going to press the sys key. I'm going to page to the hardware screen. And then at the very bottom of the hardware screen, we should see the ADC filter and have the option to turn it off. And you can see that mine is off. Yours needs to be off as well. All right, once that's done, we're gonna go and put it up for a little test flight. I'm not even gonna change the PIDs. Just let's see how good it flies. The sun's coming to get me. I'm not just gonna go like rip balls, although I will do some maneuvering. The first thing I wanna look for is, do the motors sound smooth? Do I see any sort of roughness or twitching? And those might be signs that there's something mechanically wrong with my quad, or it might be signs that I have insufficient filtering or a bad gyro. In this basic state, there should essentially be nothing wrong with how the quad flies. I'm not pushing it hard. Yeah, everything should be fine. But you're gonna wanna check that because before you fly more aggressively, especially on a new firmware, you're gonna wanna just check it while flying conservatively. Motors sound very smooth, just a wee, not like a kind of a sound, just a nice smooth sound. And I don't see in the goggles any sort of twitching or anything like that, so we're gonna proceed. And the next thing I might do is do some like full throttle punches to see if I bring out any twitching or any bad things when I hit the throttle. So I'm good throughout the whole RPM range, and I think I am. So let's just check and see how good Betaflight 4.3 flies, and we'll do the same basic tests that I did when I tested the KISS flight controllers. First thing we're gonna do is we'll do some snap rolls. Seems pretty good. Don't see any bounce back. I think there's a little bounce back there. I'll have to check the high def footage to be sure. Just a little bounce back. On front flip, I didn't see any. That's probably more about my sticks or my eyes than anything else. What about throbbles, as Mark Spatz calls them? Throbbles is where you punch the throttle and drop it, and the nose of it moves. So I'm not gonna move the pitch stick at all. I'm just gonna So got a little jitter there at the bottom of the throttle range when I fully drop the throttle, but overall, the nose stays pretty smooth. Pretty happy with how that's flying, honestly. How about prop wash oscillation? Prop wash oscillation. We'll do some. Now we're down toward the end of the battery here. so we're not getting quite the same power that we would on a full battery, but pretty good. Stupid sun moving all the time. I'm like Aragorn, you know, in that scene in Lord of the Rings where he's sitting in the corner of and he's like, shadow, I'm the Aragorn. So you want to tune your quadcopter, huh? Is this what we're going to do the whole rest of the video as? Jesus. All right, well, now that we've done a little test flight with some test maneuvers, let's do an actual like freestyle flight and just see how it flies. Try not to crash, okay, Bardwell? Feels pretty good. I'm a little more active on the throttle when I'm like doing these feel it out freestyle flights, because I want to see how it responds to throttle punches, if it stays stable or not. And it really is. How about prop wash? Smooth as flip. That was not the most aggressive prop wash. Over the trees was not the most aggressive you could be with the prop wash oscillation, because I kept sort of continually moving into it. Zero prop wash there. Pretty good. I mean, honestly, I have no complaints about how this is flying. I mean, I gotta be honest with you, I would just fly that. Like, I would just be like, okay, cool, I'll just get on with my day. At that point, my ability as a pilot is what's holding me back, not the tune. There's nothing wrong with it. Prop wash oscillation is pretty good, motors sound smooth, and I'm just gonna spend the next 2 hours ripping instead of flipping with sliders. But that's not what you want from a PID tuning video. So I think the next place I would go with a PID tune is to try to find the minimum amount of filtering I could get away with to set a good base for the PID tune. And this is going to be very subject to the build quality of your build. So a build with a well-designed frame that doesn't have a lot of resonance issues, a build with new motors with good smooth bearings, a build with new props, a mechanically sound build is going to be able to push those filters further and push the PID tune further without all that background noise of vibration that gets in the way of a good PID tune. So if you have a quad that's super beat up, it doesn't mean you can't get a good PID tune out of it. It just means you won't be able to push it as far. But this is my perfect freestyle build, so let's see how far we can push it. One way to reduce the filtering would be to turn the gyro low pass to off. Chris Thompson specifically said don't do this because it's serving a certain function that needs to be there even if you have the best build in the world. It has to do with aliasing, if you're interested. The other thing we could do is we could try to turn off the D-term filters. For example, we could turn off D-term low pass 1. But I think instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this D-term slider to the right. And as we move it to the right, we will get less and less filtering. The difference between turning the D-term low pass off and moving the slider to the right is when the slider is moved to the right, there's a dynamic D-term filter that moves up and down depending on various factors. And moving the slider to the right means that that filter is less and less active, but it's still there when you might need it. Whereas turning it off entirely, it's just gone forever. And I think moving it to the right is safer for most people. So we're gonna move that to the right, and I think like 1.2 is probably safe for most people, and then as we get past like 1.25, we get this warning. So let's just stop at like 1.3, and we're gonna fly. And once again, I'm gonna start with relatively gentle flying, listening for the motors. Do the motors sound smooth, or do they have any sort of sounds of warbling or... I'm also going to look for sort of shakes in the horizon, twitches. So I'm exaggerating and doing that with the stick, but any sign that our lack of filtering is causing us problems. And I don't see any of that. And then I'm going to do a little bit more aggressive flying. I'm going to do a throttle ramp and look for any sign that the motors don't want to slow down. That would be a sign that we had insufficient filtering and we have a problem. We need to not move that slider anymore. And then I'm going to do some more aggressive flying. And I'm going to bring the quad in, and I'm going to feel if the motors feel hot or if the motors are cool. And the motors are definitely not cool, but they are warm, so we're okay. Now here's the thing. We could continue to push that slider to the right, but I've actually found it can be difficult to get Betaflight 4.3 especially to misbehave in this way. It's got a dynamic D-term, and that means that some of the effect of turning the filtering down is mitigated. You're not going to necessarily be able to push that filter to the right until you hit an obviously bad situation that tells you you need to stop. What might happen though is that you push that filter to the right and to the right and to the right, and maybe you get it extremely to the right and the quad is flying okay, but then one day you crack an arm slightly or you bend a prop and that pushes it right over the edge and blah, now you smoke a motor or something. So I wouldn't encourage you to go nuts with this, and I wouldn't encourage you to assume that just because it flies fine under the best of conditions, it'll be okay under the worst conditions. Let's put this filter slider all the way to the right and go fly and see if anything bad happens. I'm gonna walk over there and put it down because I don't want to take off right next to myself if it might flip out. The motors don't sound really much different. Maybe a little less smooth. Just a little bit more sort of overtones. And horizon looks steady. I don't see any wiggles or twitches. I'm going to be aware the motors may be hot. If I go too aggressive, we'll try a throttle ramp. The motors come back down to idle. There's no tendency to fly away. And let's do some little shuddering there. Feels a little bit less smooth in these sharp turns, and a little bit sort of oh, I swear I can feel the difference. Seems fine. Prop wash handling? So the prop wash handling doesn't seem quite as smooth to me. We are reducing latency in the PID loop, which should make prop wash handling better, but we're also introducing a ton more gyro noise, which will make the quad overall fly worse. How about the motors? The motors are noticeably warmer, although not distressingly hot. We could fly like this, but I think we would end up with what I would call a fragile tune. A tune that is just waiting for things to go wrong, and one day it's perfect, and one day like it's bad, and you don't know why. And especially for freestyle, I don't want that. I want a more robust, more resilient tune. So I'm gonna come back in here and make some changes. And I think where I'm gonna be happy is with the D-term filter multiplier at like 1.5 to about 1.3. I think people running a clean build will be able to run there. I think it's relatively safe if you have a clean build and is probably not gonna like ridiculously smoke your motors or anything. Of course, your mileage may vary and you always have to check. You always have to check. Then let's go to the PID profile settings, and what I think we should do is we should disable expert mode. And we're just going to have these three tuning sliders. So there's additional tuning sliders available, but I feel like let's just work with the first three only and try to keep things simple. And the place we're going to start there is to find the maximum D gain that you can get away with. If you want to know more about what the P, the I, the D, and FeedForward do, I'm going to link down below to Chris Rosser's PID tuning video, and his PID tuning guide is somewhat the steps I'm going through here. And he has in that video a really great breakdown of what the P, the I, and the D are in a PID controller. But the general process that I'm going to use is I'm going to find how high I can raise my D gains, then I'm going to raise my P gains to be proportional to the D, and then I'm going to raise stick response to just change how sharp the stick response feels. So let's start by raising the D gains. And what might you have to lower the D gains? But probably not, because the defaults are relatively conservative, especially for like a 5-inch like this. So I'm going to raise the D gains, and we're just going to take them up to like 1.2. And again, we're looking for the same things that we were looking for when we were reducing the filtering and moving the filter slider to the right. Hot motors, rough sounding motors, tendency for the quad to not throttle down after a full throttle punch. We're going to just move the slider to the right until we reach a point where we start to see some sign of those things. So I'm going to try 1.3, which is a fairly big move, but I don't want to be here all afternoon trying to show you guys, make something happen. And then we'll go fly. All right. Motors. Sound fine. No sign of flyaway. Let's do some. Prop wash handling is getting sharper. Wow. Feels good. Feel like we could, let's check if the motors are hot. We haven't pushed them very hard, but let's just see if they've gotten hot at all. Now, when we're looking for the negative effects of excess D gain, it is necessary to do aggressive turns and sharp stick movements at high throttle or mid throttle. Betaflight has a feature called dynamic damping, which lowers the D gain during gentle movements. So you could have really high D gain that's going to cause you to have hot motors, or did I have hot motors? I feel okay. You could have really high D gain that's going to cause you problems, but you won't know it if you fly too gently. They are a little warmer than before. We'll go just a little further. Let's go to 1.5. You hear that? You hear how the motors are going ba-ba, 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 ba-ba. That's a sign, the very beginning of a sign that we have gone too far. By raising the D term and moving the filter slider to the right, we're allowing more vibration and noise into the system. And when it's sitting there on the ground, it's starting to potentially get into like a feedback loop that'll make problems. I probably won't go any further, but let's give it a flight anyway. Don't see any like twitching in the horizon. Horizon is steady. No sign of a flyaway. Let's do some sharp turns. Ooh, so good. Ooh, wow. I feel like the prop wash handling has gotten even better. It's just so smooth through those turns. I'm not looking at the high def footage right now, but to me, this feels pretty good. I think I'm not gonna go any further, and I might actually dial it back just a little because I didn't like how rough the motors. Oh, yeah, I think I'm gonna dial it back just a little, maybe to 1.4. That's a little warmer than I'd prefer. How warm is too warm for the motors? A good rule of thumb is if you touch the motors and they're like literally painful to the touch, you're at risk of smoking the motors. In that case, I wasn't flying very aggressively for very long, so maybe they would have gotten hotter, but they were just they weren't painful, but they were starting to get to the point where I was like, I'd like them to be a little bit cool, because I don't want to smoke these nice motors. I'm out of batteries. To tell you the truth, the sun's going down anyway, so I'm gonna have to come back tomorrow and pick this video up, but I'm not gonna make you wait. I'm just gonna put it all in one video so you can get all that content that you want. Before I do that though, would you go down and hit the like button? It would mean a lot. Thank you so much. Well, I ain't trying to say spring is sprung or nothing, but it's so warm out there today that in the sunshine, my laptop literally was just shutting down from the heat. So we're gonna go inside and yeah. It'll be okay. And the next thing we got to do is find the right balance of D gains and P gains. So P and D kind of oppose each other. And so the higher your D, the higher your P has to be in order to balance it out. There's a certain, people will talk about the PD ratio. So we've raised D as high as we feel like we can get it. Now we're going to try raising P to see if we can find the optimal ratio of P to D. And we're trying to do this without going into black box, so we're just gonna fly it and we're gonna see what happens. And the number one thing that I'm gonna look at is the prop wash performance. You see, having P too low or too high can result, the classical thing that you look at for is bounce back at the end of a sharp flip or roll. We didn't really have any of that. And well, I'll look for that too, and if we see that start to come out, it'll mean we've gone too far. But I'm mostly gonna be looking at the prop wash performance. The smooth turns and good prop wash handling are one of the most important things to me in a freestyle quad. If I raise P and the prop wash gets worse, even if I don't see bounce back in the flips and rolls, I might go ahead and just say, you know what, we've kind of already found the ideal ratio. Let's see what happens though. And at the beginning, we had essentially a 1-to-1 ratio of P to D. Both of them are at 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep that 1-to-1 ratio and take P up to 1.4. Now, previously when we were making changes to D and filters, I would very carefully fly to make sure I wasn't going to get a flyaway or smoked motor in regards to the changes. Changing P and I doesn't have that same effect, so I can pretty much safely take off. What I'm going to look for first, let's just look for bounce back on flips and rolls. I think I'm seeing the tiniest bit of bounce back. I don't know. Yeah, no, maybe it was in the sticks. No, that's pretty solid. I don't see any bounce back there in the DVR. I'll check the HD camera, but the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these sharp turns. And what I want to do is get the quad sliding backwards into its own prop wash. And it creates this sort of rough sound as it slides into the turbulent air from its own props. And that's called prop wash oscillation. And I mostly I'm hearing just the tiniest bit of it. There was that was pretty strong right there. I saw it in addition to hearing it. Yeah, I'm able to bring it out now. If I try really hard, I'm able to bring it out. So I do think the prop wash oscillation has gotten worse by raising the P, and that's kind of what I would expect. Let's just try some like, not there. I am hearing it there pretty strongly though. Really smooth there. I stayed in the throttle a little bit instead of going fully to idle, which helps minimize it. And you'll see me do these big drops. You really bring prop wash out when you're descending into your own turbulent air. Like right there, just dropping flat. So you'll see me do these big drops in addition to rapid turns. I feel like the prop wash performance is a little worse, and I'm not convinced the cornering feels any better. 18 volts, I'll bring it in. I gotta land right now. We're gonna die. We're gonna kill it. We're gonna kill it. 18 volts. So I'm not convinced that the cornering feels any sharper. We could look at black box and we could see the effect of that increased P gain on the traces, but we're trying to stay out of black box for this video. The prop wash handling definitely, I feel like it seemed a little worse. You guys will have a better perspective than me because you'll also be listening to the high definition, whereas I only have the DVR in my ears. I think that I would bring this down a little bit. I feel like the right thing to do is to take this back down to 1.0, but that kind of feels wrong too. Like, should we try lowering it? In general, the default PID gains are a little bit low already for a typical 5-inch freestyle quad. So I just know from experience that you're probably not going to want to lower it. You probably want to raise it a little bit just to sharpen up that response. So I'm going to bump it to 1.1 just on principle because it just feels wrong to leave it at 1.0, and we're going to leave it there. The other thing you can see we're doing here is we're changing the I gain. So they're calling this tracking, and they're raising the P and the I gains together. And the I term is used to stabilize the quad. A quad with very high I gain will kind of be stiff and reluctant to turn. A quad with very low I gain will be kind of loose and wobbly, and especially at low throttle, it'll drift. The reason that it's not such a big deal to move P and I gains together is that Betaflight has a function called I term relax. And I term relax reduces the I gain when you do sharp stick movements. So the times when the I term being too high would get you into trouble, they automatically lower it. And the times when you need that stiffness, when you're not deflecting the stick, the I term just kind of is what it is, and it usually does a good job. So the main way that we would tune the I term is going to be to actually change I term relax and not tune I separate from P. And I've got a separate video about tuning I term relax for stick feel, and I'm going to put that down in the video description. You can check that out when you're done here. For now, though, we're just going to leave the P and the I gains moving together with the slider as the Betaflight devs intended. The final thing we're going to tune is the feed forward. Feed forward is referred to as stick response, and the main thing that makes feed forward different from the other PID terms we've been talking about is that all of the other PID terms are reactive. You move the stick, the flight controller looks at how the quad is moving, sees that the quad is not moving the way the stick is commanding it to, and then the flight controller or the PID controller causes the motors to spin to make the quad move in the commanded way. But feed forward is proactive. As soon as you begin to move the stick, the PID controller says, we need to get moving. And it starts the motor spinning to begin the quad moving, and then sort of the gyro and the PID controller catch up. Okay, so feed forward strongly affects stick feel, how sharp the quad seems to feel. So let's try raising stick response, and I would encourage you just to try high values of stick response and feel the difference. If you're looking at black box, there are things you can look at to see whether your feed forward is ideal, but since we're trying to stay away from black box for this tuning guide, we're just going to raise it, and we're going to look for bad things happening when we fly, but we're mostly just going to go based on feel. And I'm going to take that up. Let's just take that up a fair whack. Let's take it up to 1.5. So you make a big change, and we're going to see, we're going to really be able to feel what happens. For feed forward, the way that you know it's too high is that as you deflect the stick going into a snap, flip, or roll, you will hear a sort of a zing, zing in the motors instead of just a zwip. And I don't know if we're going to hear that this time. I don't know if we can hear that. I certainly don't hear it from here. What I mostly just like to do is fly and feel. Now, Betaflight has some dynamic control of the feed forward term, which means that if you're just doing smooth movements like this where you're not moving the sticks very much, you will literally not feel any difference in the feed forward. In order to feel the feed forward, you have to be moving the stick. Note I said moving the stick, not just deflecting the stick. Oh shit. Lost my video. Cool. Cool. Well, I guess we're done PID tuning this quad for now. Dropped motor bells are a known issue with the FPV cycle motors. They're going to be unibells in the future, but for now, just to finish that thought, the most of the feel of FeedForward is going to have been done way back at the beginning where you loaded the link preset and the presets. And then after that, you can adjust that slider up a little bit if you want to sharpen up the stick feel, or down if you want to soften it up a little bit. But bear in mind that it only comes into play when you are moving the stick. If the stick is stationary, even if it's deflected, the FeedForward is not having any effect in Betaflight 4.3. If you're interested in building your own of my perfect freestyle build, despite the fact that this particular motor has betrayed me, I still really like these motors, and I think this is one of the best flying quadcopters, at least for my taste. If you want to watch me build it, or if you want to build your own, here is a card. You can go check that out. If you value the kind of content that I'm creating, would you consider joining my Patreon? For as little as $2 a month or more, if you feel like I've earned it, you get access to my Discord server, and you just feel great about supporting me in the work that I'm doing here. Thank you so much for watching. Happy flying.